In November 2012, a woman named Carrie Farver vanished without a trace. What initially seemed like just another missing person case quickly unraveled into something far darker and more sinister. As the investigation began, authorities and her loved ones hoped it would be a routine search. But soon, they would discover that this was no ordinary case. What followed was a twisted tale of obsession, manipulation, and deceit. A story that would leave investigators, friends, and family members stunned. Over the course of months, what seemed like a routine disappearance would evolve into a complex web of lies, fake identities, and a chilling connection to the dark side of technology. Carrie's disappearance was just the beginning of a harrowing ordeal that would take years to uncover. As detectives dug deeper, they found that the true story of her vanishing was intertwined with another woman's obsession, one that would not only haunt Carrie's family, but would also expose the dangers of a seemingly innocent relationship gone horribly wrong. This is the story of the disappearance of Carrie Farver, a tale that will make you question how well you really know the people in your life, and how technology, while connecting us, can also create a terrifying and deadly distance between truth and reality. A story that proves sometimes the most unsettling dangers come from places and people we least expect. Carrie Farver was the kind of woman who seemed to have it all together. A woman of sharp intellect and independence, Carrie carved her own path in life. Born and raised in the Midwest, she was the type of person who didn't rely on others for validation. Her confidence and sense of self were built from within. She had a passion for technology, and her career as a computer programmer was proof of her intellectual prowess. Carrie loved her work, often spending long hours in front of a computer screen, solving problems and creating complex software systems. But even as she excelled professionally, Carrie was also a woman who cherished her personal relationships. She maintained close bonds with her family and friends, always making time for them despite her demanding job. It wasn't unusual to find Carrie laughing over dinner with her loved ones or offering a listening ear when someone was in need. Her family described her as a kind, compassionate woman, one who was deeply loyal and protective of the people she cared about. Though she was fiercely independent, she never shied away from being a pillar of support to those she loved. But as much as Carrie thrived in her professional and personal life, her relationships weren't without complications. Like many of us, Carrie sought love and companionship, and her journey in romance was full of twists. In the years before her disappearance, Carrie had been dating Dave Kropa, a man she met online. Dave was charming, and their connection was instant. Carrie, a woman used to relying on her intellect and independence, found herself drawn to his personality, and the two began a romantic relationship that seemed promising at first. At the beginning, everything appeared to be going well. Dave was a man with whom Carrie shared her hopes, her dreams, and even her insecurities. The relationship had the potential to be everything Carrie had hoped for, a partnership where both could share their lives and support each other's goals. But as time went on, the cracks in the relationship began to appear. While Carrie was intelligent and independent, she was also someone who believed in making things work. She wasn't one to give up easily on a relationship. However, the relationship with Dave began to sour as subtle tensions started to emerge. As Carrie got to know Dave more deeply, she started to see a side of him that didn't match the image he had initially presented. There were red flags, signs of possessiveness, and an unsettling level of attention that she hadn't noticed at first. Dave became increasingly controlling, sending Carrie constant messages and showing up unannounced at her apartment. His need for reassurance and constant contact started to feel like an intrusion into Carrie's independent life. She was a woman who valued her space and autonomy, and Dave's behavior started to feel stifling. It wasn't long before Carrie began to pull away. Their relationship began to unravel. The tension between them grew, and Carrie, ever the practical person, knew she had to make a decision. She began distancing herself from Dave, wanting to regain control of her personal life and her space. Yet, Dave, who had developed a deep attachment to Carrie, was not ready to let go. The breakup was difficult, as these things often are, but Carrie's decision seemed final. However, what was supposed to be the end of their relationship soon turned into something much darker. After Carrie attempted to move on from Dave, He didn't take the breakup well. In the aftermath, things became increasingly unsettling. Dave seemed to have difficulty accepting that the relationship was truly over. But the situation took a strange twist when another woman entered the picture. A woman named Chandra Whitehead, who, unbeknownst to Carrie, would become central to the unfolding nightmare. While Carrie was attempting to regain control of her life and move forward, the complexities of her relationship with Dave and the presence of Chandra would lead to the unraveling of everything. As Carrie tried to focus on her work, her family, and her own happiness, her ties to Dave, both emotionally and psychologically, would only grow more complicated. Carrie's family, friends, and colleagues knew her as a strong, intelligent, and self-sufficient woman, someone who had the ability to handle life's challenges. But they had no way of knowing that behind the scenes, a disturbing and obsessive relationship was beginning to consume Carrie's life. What began as a seemingly ordinary breakup quickly escalated into a web of deception and obsession, ultimately leading to her mysterious disappearance in November of 2012. Her intelligence, independence, and ambition were traits that shaped her life, but they also became the very qualities that may have made her a target for someone's obsession. As her disappearance unfolded, it would become clear that what had seemed like a normal romantic breakup was, in fact, just the beginning of a chilling, complex story. One that would leave everyone questioning the lengths some people will go to when rejection turns into fixation. On November 13, 2012, Carrie Farver's day started like any other. After leaving her job, a position she loved as a computer programmer, she made her way home. However, that night, Carrie never showed up. Her family and friends were immediately concerned. She had always kept in touch, often texting or calling to check in. But that evening, there was no word from her. As the hours passed and Carrie didn't answer her phone, those closest to her began to worry. Carrie wasn't the type to disappear without letting anyone know. Her absence was out of character. She was a woman who was responsible, meticulous, and extremely close to her family. Her mother, especially, became frantic. She knew something was wrong. The next morning, her family members contacted the police. The search for Carrie began. Despite the urgency of the situation, the early days of the investigation offered little in the way of answers. Carrie's apartment appeared undisturbed. There were no signs of a struggle, no forced entry, and nothing appeared out of the ordinary. It was as though she had simply vanished into thin air. Her car was still parked outside her apartment complex, and her personal belongings were untouched inside her apartment. There were no signs that someone had broken in or taken her forcibly. Her loved ones held on to the hope that perhaps she had gone somewhere to clear her mind, or that something had happened unexpectedly that caused her to lose contact. But as the hours turned into days, that theory started to seem less and less likely. As investigators began to examine the details of her disappearance, they turned to her phone records and online activity to try and make sense of where Carrie could have gone. They quickly discovered that her phone had been used sporadically after her disappearance. The first clue came from Carrie's phone. There were text messages sent from her number, but the messages seemed odd. The tone was inconsistent with how Carrie would normally communicate, and it quickly became apparent that someone else might be sending the messages in her place. As the investigation progressed, her online activity became even more concerning. Authorities discovered that someone had been logging into her social media accounts, continuing conversations with people in her life, even though Carrie had not been seen for several days. These actions appeared deliberately staged, leading detectives to suspect that whoever had taken Carrie was actively trying to throw investigators off the trail by impersonating her online. Initially, the police worked under the assumption that Carrie may have left voluntarily, perhaps needing time away from her personal life. After all, there were no signs of foul play, and her apartment was neat and orderly. But as the investigation continued, detectives began to question this theory. The more they dug into the details, the more inconsistencies they found in the circumstances surrounding Carrie's disappearance. The breakthrough came when they noticed that the text messages sent from Carrie's phone were not written in her usual style. The language used was more erratic, and the messages didn't make sense in the context of Carrie's normal communication. It became clear that someone else was behind the messages, and that person was trying to make it appear as though Carrie had willingly left. By the end of the first few days, the assumption that Carrie had voluntarily disappeared was ruled out. The fact that her online identity was being manipulated by someone else, combined with the lack of any clear sign that she had left on her own, made investigators realize that something far more sinister was at play. Still, no one had any idea just how deep the web of deception and obsession would run. As the police ramped up their search, they also started to consider the people in Carrie's life more carefully, especially those who might have had a motive to harm her. The fact that Carrie had recently ended her relationship with Dave Kropa, as well as the strange presence of another woman, Chandra Whitehead, who had begun to communicate with Carrie's friends and family, suggested that the truth might be far darker than anyone had initially imagined. The search for Carrie was now a full-fledged operation. Detectives began to interview people in her life more closely, trying to trace her final movements, hoping for any lead, however small, that could reveal where she had gone, or, more importantly, who had taken her. But with every passing day, the mystery deepened, and the possibility of voluntary disappearance seemed more and more unlikely. As the investigation gained momentum, investigators realized they were not just searching for a missing woman. They were on the trail of a shocking tale of obsession, manipulation, and deceit. Carrie Farver's disappearance was no longer a simple missing person case. It was the beginning of a twisted nightmare that no one could have foreseen. As the investigation into Carrie Farver's disappearance continued, something unsettling began to happen. Just days after she was last seen, her phone began sending strange text messages, and her social media accounts were updated, giving the chilling impression that Carrie was still alive. The messages were sent to her friends, family, and even her employer. At first glance, they seemed like ordinary, everyday texts. Some were casual check-ins, others appeared to be typical conversations, just like Carrie would normally have. But there was something distinctly off about them. Carrie's friends and family started receiving text messages from her phone. But as they read the messages, something didn't feel right. The tone was wrong, the language was unusual and not quite like Carrie's. The messages were not the way she would have communicated. Her sense of humor was missing, and the tone was strangely distant, as if the sender didn't know Carrie as well as they claimed to. Then there were the social media updates. Carrie's Facebook account was active, with posts appearing that didn't seem like her at all. New photos were uploaded, and status updates started to appear, almost as if Carrie herself had logged in. But those who knew her best began to feel a sense of unease. The posts were strange, out of character, almost robotic. Her friends could see that the posts didn't feel like the real Carrie. She wouldn't have posted certain things, especially not in the way they appeared. The situation grew even more confusing. Carrie's phone continued to be used, but she wasn't the one using it. Her loved ones, who had been desperately searching for answers, now had to grapple with the growing uncertainty of whether Carrie was still alive, or if something far more sinister was happening. As the strange texts piled up, investigators began to focus on one crucial question. Who was sending these messages? At first, the theory was that Carrie had somehow gone off on her own, willingly disappearing. Maybe she was trying to start over, or maybe she had experienced some kind of personal crisis. But that theory was quickly ruled out as investigators noticed the oddities in the messages. They weren't just out of character, they were calculated. Whoever was sending these texts knew just enough about Carrie to make them seem plausible, but not enough to capture her true essence. The more they looked, the more investigators realized that these were not the actions of a woman trying to leave her life behind. Then came the chilling possibility. Someone else was controlling Carrie's phone. It wasn't just a theory anymore, it was a chilling reality. The more investigators delved into the texts and social media updates, the more they realized that someone was deliberately trying to cover their tracks, trying to make it appear as though Carrie was still out there, still alive, and maybe even trying to reach out to her loved ones. But the unsettling question remained. Who was behind it? As investigators traced the messages, they began to dig deeper into Carrie's recent relationships, particularly her relationship with Dave Kropa. Could he be involved? Had he been trying to stay connected to Carrie in a way that was unhealthy? After all, it was clear that their breakup had been emotional and filled with tension. Could his obsession with her have led him to take drastic measures to keep her close, even after she had left him? But there was another possibility. Chandra Whitehead, a woman who had entered the scene shortly before Carrie's disappearance, began to appear in the investigation. She was someone who had shown an increasing amount of interest in Carrie's life, and her involvement in the case became even more perplexing. Chandra, who had once been involved with Dave Kropa, was sending texts as well, pretending to be Carrie. It wasn't clear what her motivations were, but it became increasingly apparent that someone was playing a game of manipulation, using technology to create confusion, to mislead Carrie's loved ones, and to keep investigators in the dark. The mystery deepened. Investigators now had a chilling theory. The person behind the messages wasn't just trying to hide Carrie's whereabouts. They were trying to make it look as though Carrie was still in control of her life, as if she was still making decisions, still interacting with her loved ones. But who was this person? Was it someone who had known Carrie so well they could mimic her texting habits? Someone who had a deep understanding of how Carrie communicated, her friendships, and her relationships. This wasn't just a disappearance anymore. This was something far more complex. The messages were the first signs of a twisted manipulation, a clear attempt to create a false reality, to erase any traces of what had really happened to Carrie. As the texts kept coming, investigators grew more determined to find out who was behind them and what their ultimate goal was. The chilling realization settled in. Carrie's disappearance wasn't just a case of a missing person. It was the beginning of a psychological game, one that would go on for months and, ultimately, lead to even darker twists in the search for the truth. As the investigation into Carrie Farver's disappearance continued to evolve, a new and unsettling figure emerged. Shauna Gollier, the woman who had entered Dave Kropa's life after Carrie. On the surface, Shauna appeared to be just another girlfriend, someone who had come into Dave's life after his relationship with Carrie had ended. But there was something far darker lurking beneath Shauna's calm exterior. Shauna, in many ways, was obsessed with Carrie. While it may have seemed like a simple case of a woman moving on from a past relationship, Shauna's obsession with Carrie began to take a disturbing and twisted turn. Despite knowing that Dave had ended his relationship with Carrie, Shauna couldn't let go of the idea of Carrie. She became fixated on her, and this fixation soon escalated into jealousy and an overwhelming desire for control. It was clear that Shauna wasn't just trying to secure her place in Dave's life. She was obsessed with erasing Carrie from the picture entirely. As the investigation deepened, authorities began to uncover disturbing evidence of Shauna's behavior. While initially, Shauna may have seemed like just another girlfriend with a bit of a jealous streak, it soon became evident that her behavior was far beyond ordinary jealousy. She was stalking Carrie, tracking her every move and becoming increasingly obsessed with her every action. Shauna's stalking didn't stop with mere observation. She began to take more sinister steps to insert herself into Carrie's life. She started sending fake text messages from Carrie's phone, trying to manipulate the situation by pretending to be Carrie. The texts she sent were convincing enough to deceive Carrie's friends and family into believing that Carrie was still alive and trying to communicate with them. But the messages were far from ordinary. They were crafted in a way that seemed out of character for Carrie. It was clear that someone with an intimate knowledge of Carrie's life was orchestrating them. But it wasn't Carrie herself. It was Shauna. Shauna's obsession didn't just stay in the digital realm. It began to spill over into the real world, with her stalking Carrie's family and friends. She would show up uninvited, attempting to get information about Carrie from anyone who would listen. She even went so far as to impersonate Carrie in phone calls, pretending to be her during conversations with Dave's friends and family, trying to stir up confusion and manipulate perceptions. Investigators began to piece together a terrifying picture of Shauna's behavior. She wasn't just a jealous ex-girlfriend. She had developed a dangerous obsession with controlling Dave, and in her mind, that meant eliminating the presence of Carrie entirely. Shauna was determined to become the only woman in Dave's life, even if it meant resorting to extreme, illegal measures. As it became clearer that Shauna's obsession with Carrie was escalating, investigators began to uncover more about Shauna's mental state. The more they learned about her, the more they realized that Shauna wasn't acting out of simple jealousy or insecurity. Her actions pointed to something far more troubling, an unhealthy obsession that had spiraled out of control. Shauna wasn't just trying to insert herself into Dave's life. She was trying to take over. Her need to be the sole focus of his attention became more intense. Her actions weren't just manipulative, they were driven by a deep, disturbing sense of control, a desire to push Carrie out of the picture completely, even if it meant resorting to deception, manipulation, and even violence. As investigators delved deeper into Shauna's past, they learned of her history of controlling behavior and how she had tried to dominate Dave's emotions. It became evident that Shauna would do anything to make sure she was the only one Dave focused on. And as her obsession grew, so did her need to create a false reality, where Carrie didn't exist, where Shauna was the woman in Dave's life, and everyone else had to fall in line with her narrative. But Shauna's dangerous obsession didn't stop at impersonating Carrie online. Investigators were beginning to realize that Shauna's desire to control Dave and to erase Carrie from his life would have far darker consequences. Her behavior was no longer just a series of manipulative actions. It was leading to a far more deadly conclusion. At this point in the investigation, authorities began to recognize that Shauna's stalking and manipulation were not just acts of jealousy. They were the signs of a dangerous, unstable mind that was capable of going to extremes to achieve what she wanted. The more they uncovered about Shauna's obsession, the more disturbing it became. The question on everyone's mind now wasn't just how far Shauna had gone to manipulate Dave. It was how far she was willing to go to keep Carrie out of the picture entirely. As the investigation into Carrie Farver's disappearance progressed, investigators began to peel back the layers of deception and manipulation. At first, the strange text messages and social media posts had left everyone confused. Was Carrie still alive? Or was someone else orchestrating a twisted game, sending messages from her phone to keep up the appearance that she was? As the days passed, the focus slowly shifted toward Shauna Gollier, Dave Kropa's new girlfriend, whose erratic behavior had started to raise suspicions. The breakthrough came when investigators began tracing the origin of the mysterious texts that had been sent from Carrie's phone. What initially seemed like an unsettling coincidence began to feel more like a deliberate attempt to mislead. Police discovered that Shauna was the one behind the messages, using Carrie's phone to send out texts to friends, family, and even Dave, pretending to be Carrie herself. As detectives began to piece together the evidence, it became clear that Shauna wasn't just an innocent bystander in this case. She was actively involved in covering up Carrie's disappearance. She had used Carrie's phone and social media accounts to create a digital trail that made it seem as though Carrie was still alive, perhaps even trying to stay in contact with her loved ones. But as investigators dug deeper, they discovered disturbing details that exposed Shauna's involvement in the crime. It wasn't just about impersonating Carrie online. It was about controlling the narrative. Shauna had gone to great lengths to ensure that no one would suspect her. She knew how to manipulate those around her, including Dave, and it was becoming clear that her obsession with taking over Carrie's life had driven her to extremes. Shauna wasn't just hiding behind the messages. She was actively manipulating everyone involved. The police soon uncovered that the texts weren't the only lies Shauna had told. She had woven an intricate web of false alibis and contradictory statements in an attempt to throw off investigators. She had made sure to be seen in public places, trying to establish that she was nowhere near Carrie on the day of her disappearance. But as the detectives dug into her whereabouts that fateful day, Shauna's alibi began to unravel. The breakthrough came when investigators reviewed the phone records and digital footprint of both Shauna and Carrie. The data revealed that Shauna had been in close proximity to Carrie's phone on the day she vanished, and even more disturbing, Shauna had been actively using it, sending the messages that had been fooling everyone. The timing of the messages matched Shauna's movements, and the evidence began to stack up against her. With Shauna's alibi falling apart, police started focusing more on her actions leading up to and after Carrie's disappearance. They found glaring inconsistencies in her statements. She had claimed to be at certain locations, but surveillance footage didn't match her claims. Witnesses contradicted her version of events, and as more interviews were conducted, it became clear that Shauna had been lying, trying to cover up her role in what had happened to Carrie. What's more, Shauna's involvement didn't just extend to texts and fake alibis. She was actively trying to distance herself from the truth. In her mind, Eliminating Carrie from the equation was the only way to secure her place in Dave's life. The obsession had clouded her judgment, and she had gone to great lengths to deceive everyone, even going so far as to impersonate Carrie in phone calls and messages, manipulating not only the police but also Carrie's loved ones. As the investigation continued to build its case, detectives also discovered that Shauna had been following Carrie's every move, keeping close tabs on her even after Carrie and Dave broke up. It wasn't enough for Shauna to simply be with Dave. She had to be the only woman in his life. Her jealousy and obsession had now escalated to the point where it was clear she saw Carrie as a threat, someone who had to be removed no matter the cost. The mounting evidence against Shauna was undeniable. Investigators began to connect the dots, realizing that Shauna's involvement in Carrie's disappearance wasn't just a case of a jealous girlfriend. It was a calculated, manipulative scheme driven by an overwhelming need for control. Shauna had tried to cover her tracks by creating an airtight alibi, but as the details of her actions came to light, it was clear that the truth was slipping through her fingers. Now, with the police closing in, Shauna's world began to collapse. She could no longer hide behind the false messages and lies. The truth was catching up to her, and soon, she would have to face the consequences of her obsession and manipulation. As the investigation into Carrie Farver's disappearance deepened, there was a haunting sense that something far darker was at play. Months had passed, and with every twist and turn, investigators grew more convinced that the answer was hidden in the tangled web of lies and manipulation spun by Shauna Gollier. Despite the eerie messages, false alibis, and deceptive behavior, the question still loomed. What had really happened to Carrie Farver? Then, in 2013, the long-awaited breakthrough came. Carrie's body was discovered. It was found in a remote location, far from the places where anyone would have expected it to be. The body was buried in a secluded area, and the discovery sent shockwaves through the investigation, confirming the worst fears of her family. Carrie wasn't just missing. She was dead. The relief of finding her, after all the false hope and confusion, was quickly overshadowed by the devastating reality that she had been murdered. The discovery of Carrie's body marked a crucial turning point in the case. What had started as a missing persons investigation was now a homicide investigation, and all the attention turned toward who was responsible for this horrific crime. Carrie's family, already devastated by her disappearance, were now forced to face the brutal truth. Someone they knew had taken her life. The piece that had been missing for so long was now right in front of them, and it led back to a singular, dark truth. Shauna Gollier was behind Carrie's murder. As the evidence mounted, it became increasingly clear that Shauna's obsession with Dave Kropa and her desire to eliminate Carrie from the picture had fueled the violence that took Carrie's life. Investigators learned that Shauna had gone to extreme lengths to stalk Carrie, to impersonate her, to manipulate those around her. But it was not enough for Shauna to simply control Dave. She needed to remove the one person she saw as a threat to her future with him. Jealousy and obsession, the forces that had driven Shauna to such extremes, now stood at the heart of this tragedy. It was revealed that on the day of Carrie's disappearance, Shauna had lured Carrie to a secluded location, under the pretense of having a conversation. What transpired next would forever change the course of the investigation, and the lives of everyone who knew Carrie. Shauna had killed Carrie in cold blood, driven by her own need for control, her unhealthy fixation on Dave, and a desire to take over Carrie's life entirely. Shauna's motive was painfully clear. She saw Carrie as an obstacle, a rival who had to be eliminated. Her obsession had festered for months, growing more toxic and violent. Shauna had believed that removing Carrie from the equation would guarantee her place in Dave's life, and she was willing to do whatever it took to make that happen. After the discovery of Carrie's body, Shauna Gollier was arrested. The details of her arrest were chilling. She was no longer just the suspicious ex-girlfriend. She was now the prime suspect in a brutal murder. As police pieced together the evidence and gathered witness testimony, it became undeniable. Shauna was responsible for Carrie's death. The charges against Shauna were severe: first-degree murder and tampering with evidence. The investigation revealed that Shauna had tried to cover her tracks, lying to the police, fabricating alibis, and trying to mislead everyone involved. But the mounting evidence against her was irrefutable. Shauna had planned and carried out the murder, driven by an obsession so intense that it led her to commit the ultimate crime. The trial of Shauna Gollier would be one of public scrutiny. People were horrified by the brutality of the crime, and the chilling details of Shauna's obsession only made the case more unsettling. She wasn't just a jealous ex-girlfriend. She was a woman who had allowed her unhealthy fixation to spiral out of control, eventually leading to the death of an innocent woman. As Shauna was led away in handcuffs, the Farver family was left to grapple with the loss of their beloved daughter, sister, and friend. The search for Carrie had lasted for months, but the answers they had been desperately hoping for were not the ones they had wanted to hear. The discovery of Carrie's body brought some closure, but the pain of her senseless murder would never fully fade. The case became a stark reminder of the dangers of obsession and manipulation, of how jealousy and the need for control can spiral into a deadly force. And for Carrie's family, the truth had been far worse than they had imagined. Carrie Farver was gone, but the dark legacy of Shauna Gollier's obsession would haunt them all forever. In the aftermath of Carrie Farver's tragic murder, the case was officially brought to a close with the conviction of Shauna Gollier. After an intense investigation, Shauna was found guilty of first-degree murder, marking the end of a long and agonizing search for answers. But while the legal case was closed, the emotional wounds left behind would never truly heal. The trial itself was a stark reminder of the horrors of obsession and jealousy. The evidence against Shauna was overwhelming: her manipulation, the false messages she sent, the lies she told, and the cold, calculated way she eliminated Carrie from the picture in a bid to claim her place in Dave Kropa's life. Shauna's conviction brought a sense of justice, but it did nothing to erase the devastation she caused. For Carrie's family, the nightmare of losing their loved one was made even more painful by the revelation of the way in which she had been taken from them. The emotional toll on Carrie's family and friends was unimaginable. Her mother, father, and siblings had hoped for months that Carrie would return, that she would come home safe. When the discovery of her body confirmed the worst, their world was shattered. No amount of justice could ever replace the loss of a daughter, a sister, and a friend. The family was left to grapple with the senselessness of the crime, the thought that their loved one had been taken not by a random act of violence, but by someone who had been close to the people she loved. Carrie's story is a tragic one, but it also carries with it a haunting lesson about the dangers that can lurk in the shadows of seemingly innocent relationships. Obsession, jealousy, and control are not always easy to recognize, but they can escalate quickly, turning a relationship into something terrifying. For Carrie, the warning signs were all around, but no one could have predicted just how far Shauna's obsession would take her. One of the most chilling aspects of this case is how technology played a role in the manipulation and deception. Shauna Gollier used Carrie's phone and social media accounts to impersonate her and mislead the authorities. In the age of digital communication, where texts, emails, and social media profiles are so often our primary means of connecting, it's easy to forget how vulnerable we can become to those who would exploit our trust and invade our privacy. The case shines a light on the dangers of technology, how a phone that was meant to connect Carrie to her family became a tool used by Shauna to continue the deception. For Carrie's family, the emotional aftermath was profound. They were left with a deep sense of loss, compounded by the realization that the woman responsible for taking their loved one's life had been living among them, pretending to be something she wasn't. The betrayal was almost too much to bear, not just by the woman who murdered Carrie, but by the world of lies and deceit that she had created. This case is also a stark reminder of how important it is to listen to the warning signs in relationships, whether they are romantic or otherwise. Obsessive behavior, controlling tendencies, and stalking can sometimes be dismissed as just a phase or a sign of love. But as Carrie's case proves, these behaviors can be deadly. If someone feels that they need to control or isolate another person, that's a red flag, and it should never be ignored. Additionally, stalking, whether through physical presence or digital manipulation, is not something to be taken lightly. It's a violation of boundaries and an invasion of privacy, And if left unchecked, it can escalate into something far more dangerous. This case is a warning about the destructive power of obsession and how it can destroy lives in ways that no one could have imagined. Ultimately, Carrie Farver's story is one of heartbreaking loss, but it also serves as a catalyst for important conversations about relationships, control, technology, and the dangers of ignoring warning signs. It's a reminder that what might seem like harmless behavior at first can evolve into something much more sinister if left unchecked. The Farver family may never fully recover from their loss, but through their pain, we are all reminded of the importance of recognizing the signs of unhealthy relationships and the importance of protecting ourselves and those we love. As for Shauna Gollier, her conviction may bring some semblance of justice, but it does little to undo the pain she caused. Her obsession, fueled by jealousy and deceit, ended in the senseless death of a woman who had so much more life to live. And for Carrie, she will always be remembered by those who loved her as a woman who was taken far too soon, a woman whose life was stolen by the darkness that can exist within others. Carrie's story is not just a cautionary tale. It is a call to action. Let's ensure that the lessons learned from her tragic fate are passed on, so that others may not fall victim to the same dangers.